Bismillah and alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu wa ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Okay guys, so before we carry on, we're from where we left off last week, inshallah, we're carrying on with our new course, Grounded, Being Muslim in a Godless World. We're on session 3 now. Before we continue, let's do a quick summary of what we've done so far in the past 2 sessions, inshallah. Very important, because these are laying down the foundations for this whole course, inshallah. So what was the very first thing we discussed in the very first session? Who was here?
Worldview.
Sorry.
Worldview.
Worldviews, yeah? So what is a worldview?
It's a lens that somebody can put and look at the world around him.
So it's a lens through which we see the world, yeah? How else would you summarize it?
You said a set of beliefs that one holds.
Okay, yeah. Set of fundamental beliefs that one holds, which shapes the reality, basically. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, I think that's good. Yeah, basic definition. Yeah, so it's a set of fundamental beliefs that every single person holds, which shapes the way they engage with reality, the way they see the world around them, basically. Following this, understanding that everyone has a worldview, we then went into the discussion of, what is the predominant or dominant worldview today and how it came about. So what did we conclude? What is the dominant worldview today?
Secularism.
Yes, secular
Atheism,
liberalism. Yes, secular liberalism or a modern worldview. You can use either term, right? What was the origins of this?
Enlightening. Started from
Enlightenment.
The Enlightenment, yep.
Enlightenment.
I mean, you can say it really came to its fullest during the Enlightenment or straight after. Much of the work was done during the Enlightenment, but the work was being done prior to this. So you had the French Revolution, you had the Scientific Revolution, you had the Renaissance before that, and it goes back. And prior to that, we had the Muslim world from around you can say, I think it was, 8th to the 14th century, right? With the Golden Age, Islamic Golden Age. A lot of the Western European thinkers, Christians, were going over to the Islamic world throughout those centuries and learning a lot of this information and this knowledge and the recovery of classical works and bringing it back to the West, right? So it didn't happen in a vacuum. It was really funny the other day, the Jordan Peterson and Richard Dawkins discussion. One of the things that, I thought was not surprising but unfortunate that, they say, science, this turn towards reason and science just emerged in the West suddenly, and it must have something to do with Christianity. When in reality, I mean, if you look at the academic work on this, you look at the books that have been written on this, you see a very clear link between what's happening in the Islamic world with the scientific revolution and then the Enlightenment, even the Renaissance to an extent, right? So they don't mention this. They didn't mention this. Neither of them. Both commented on it, neither mentioned anything about this. And I think it was deliberate, because I'm sure they're not they seem like well-read people, or at least that's how they come across. And I'm sure they would have come across this history, but obviously they didn't make comment on it, and I think it was deliberate. But anyway, and this shows that this is something generally you see amongst the sort of secular atheist types. When they talk about the science, they love the science, but when you talk about the history of science and the origins of it, there's no credit that's given to the Muslims, unfortunately, right? So it's something people should look into. So the Enlightenment, okay, how would you describe and summarize the Enlightenment in a couple of sentences?
Are we talking about the aspects of positivism and logical?
No, that came later.
Okay.
So that's much later, right?
Is it rejection of religion and all knowledge must be based on empirical evidence and verifiable, something that you can verify? Yeah.
So initially it wasn't a wholesale rejection of religion. Initially it was more, it's an age of reason and empiricism, right? Or free thinking, where man takes charge now and determines what's right, what's wrong, what's the way forward, makes his own governments, his own laws, and then the focus is on sort of science and empiricism and technology and all of this stuff, right? To create a worldly utopia. That's the new objective, right? It wasn't a wholesale rejection of religion. You still had people that believed in God or in aspects of religion. You had deism and you had other sorts of views in regards to God. Atheism was also a part of it, as we discussed last week. But the origins of, you can say, atheism were there. Some thinkers were atheists, many were deists, right? Later on, this obviously was linked to and led to atheism. There's a very interesting book called The Twilight of Atheism by Alistair McGrath. He's a Christian academic. And he summarizes it in a very beautiful way in one of the places he speaks about this. He says that modernity and atheism are two sides of the same coin. Right? It's a very simple way of putting it, but it's very visual. It's basically two sides of the same coin, right? And we saw this last week where, okay, what were some of the underlying tenets or views of modernity that emerged from these movements? There is no God, there is no creator. Secularism. Man taking on the role of God now, where he determines his destiny, and all of these things. So this sets the world up for all of these new isms that we discussed. And what were some of the isms and schisms that emerged from this modernity? Atheism is an obvious one, right?
Atheism, secularism, liberalism, naturalism.
Naturalism, yeah. Feminism.
Feminism.
Yeah. Hedonism.
Hedonism.
Yeah. And there's many others, but these are just some, right? And they all have this thing in common. That's why, Alistair McGrath's idea of two sides of the same coin, it makes sense, right? They all have the same underlying fundamental philosophy or ideas. So now we're going to move on to look at the crises. We looked at, okay, there's not all of modernity was bad. A lot of good things have come out of it as well, right? But in this race towards progression and, development and to create a worldly utopia, there was the focus on the fundamental things which were important for human beings, the existential things. People lost sight of that, right? And then you had the rise of the existentialist philosophers, which we'll discuss today a bit as well, who tried to bridge that gap, and fill in those voids that people had within themselves now, because they didn't have answers. Who are they? Where have they come from? Where are they going? What's life all about? No more answers, right? Without God. So they needed an alternative. But before we do that, I want to make I think it's good to discuss modernity in a bit more detail and postmodernism. Or metamodernism now, so there's stages we're shifting through. It's important to keep track of these changes, right? So we're not really, according to most academics, in the age of modernity now, right? We've moved past that, way past that. So modernism was what we discussed, after the Enlightenment, this whole idea of rationalism, empiricism, this positive outlook on life, to create a worldly utopia, to liberate people, to this atomistic view on life, about the self and the individual and all of this stuff. And they had very distinct ideas about what life was and what direction we wanted to move in and what we wanted to achieve in the world and all of this stuff. That was modernism. Now, modernity, according to some scholars, they peg it to the Enlightenment specifically. They say this was where modernity emerged from. Others have a different view. They would say they'll go back to the Renaissance. Others have categorized it in three distinct stages. So they have early modernity, they have classical modernity, and then they have late modernity. Early modernity, they would peg it to the French Revolution and the Scientific Revolution. Classical modernity was the time of, the long 19th century, as they referred to it, which was from basically the 18th century onwards. And you can say the Enlightenment period comes into that as well. And then late modernity was, some would say, around the 1960s on to about 1990s, right? And then after that now, so mid to late 20th century, you have postmodernism, right? Now, what is postmodernism? I know some of you guys looked into it a little bit. Any sort of ideas or things you came across? Again, it's very hard to, we're giving sort of summarized views on what these things are. There's a lot to discuss about these things. We can't unpack everything, obviously. But just in a general, so we have a general understanding of what postmodernism is. How would we summarize it?
There is no truth in the capital T sense. Each person has their own truth and their own way of looking at things.
Okay, good.
And they're all equally valid.
Okay, so that's one of the sort of tenets, if you like, or principles, which is mentioned again and again. There is no objective truth with a capital T. Truth is what you want to make it, what you perceive it to be. A lot of things are just social constructs, right?
Yeah,
that's
like
what they are.
Questioning everything, questioning reality, questioning everything that we believe.
Yeah, literally questioning everything, especially ethics and morality as well. Because remember, with postmodernism came this whole socialist type of movement. You know, postmodernists are very vocal and they do a lot of sort of, what's the word, demonstrations and standing up for human rights, etc. Because remember, modernity made promises. You know, we'll bring justice, we'll do this, we'll do that. They didn't deliver, basically. According to postmodernists, they didn't deliver, right? So they are now fighting for these rights of human beings, and therefore they stand up for all of these causes and things like this, right? On the surface, it seems very interesting, but there's a lot of issues, philosophical issues with this. But anyway, any other, so truth, what is truth? It's subjective, basically. There's no truth with capital T. So if you look at it from that perspective, what are people standing for? You know, if you stand for a social cause and you say, this is the truth, you know, this is objectively wrong, but at the same time, you don't believe in objective truths, it's a bit of a contradiction, right? So what else can you say about postmodernism?
I feel like as postmodernism emerged, other fields like, as you said, you know, morality and arts, literature, these kinds of things also emerged as well.
Or
with
changed.
it, changed,
Yeah.
and was, I guess, a little bit more accepted as truths. As like when you even read a novel these days, it can teach you so much about your worldview or other people's worldview. But maybe in the modernity times, that was not the case, because it was the case.
Because
Okay.
remember, literature,
Yeah.
architecture, culture, aspects of culture, you would see modernity had a huge focus on these. There was a big shift that took place in art, in literature, poetry, all of these things, because these things shape, you know, the way people look at a person's worldview. You know, because people would read a lot more back then as well. So reading these novels, reading this poetry, engaging with this architecture on a daily basis, it has an effect on the person, the way they think and their worldview, right? And they understood this. Even in the Islamic world, there's a certain architecture, right? There's a certain way things are or were, right? And these things have an impact on the soul and the psychology of a human being. So postmodernism, there was definitely a shift in art and architecture and all of these things, right?
But at what point did it become postmodernism?
Yeah, so
20th century.
yeah, about mid to late 20th century.
20th century.
Yeah, there's no clear demarcation, but these shifts don't happen like in a day, or by one thinker that comes out and says, right, now they're going this way, right? But it happens over a period of time, right? So the specifics of roughly around the mid 20th century onwards, you can say, was the age of postmodernism.
It's often viewed as a reaction against modernism,
Yes,
and
very good point.
also certainty of think it says certainty of modernism and optimism.
Yes,
Reaction to optimism and certainty of modernism.
yeah. So postmodernism, what many would say, is a reaction to modernity, right? It's an aggressive reaction towards modernity and the promises modernity made, you know, of equality, liberty, you know, independence, all of these things, right? All these promises. They saw, okay, you did nothing. You know, we still had wars, and we had evil, and we had suffering, and we had gross misconduct by certain people over other people, and all of this stuff, right? The capitalist model, all of this stuff. So they basically rejected this. They said, no, we don't want this. We want to now establish equality, and that's why there's this whole social movement dynamic to it. We want to do this and that. Some have even argued, and there's, I think, a good case for this, that postmodernism is a repackaging of Marxism, which is a very interesting perspective, right? Because Marx had his own philosophy, right, and his own ideas, and he was, you know, of socialism. Now, over the years, Marx presented his ideas as a social science. People started to realize, well, his theories or his hypotheses are not coming true. If anything, the opposite's happening.
What was theories?
So he had these models in regards to, you know, how the capitalist system works and how it's bad and detrimental because, you know, there's this different classes and the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And he made predictions, right? There was predictions that were made under that model, which were like, so I think one of the predictions was that the working class would continue to grow because of the oppression of the higher classes. The middle class will also dwindle down, and the upper class will also, or the rich and the elite would also dwindle down. There will be a small group of people at the top that will control the masses and basically exploit them. when in reality it didn't really work out like that, right? So the middle class actually grew, the upper class continued to grow, and the working class actually cut down a bit. So over the years they noticed, okay, Marx's views aren't really coming true, right? And what they decided to do, according to some academics, was they repackaged. When it got to the point where Marxism was just like, okay, this is nonsense, when people started to believe that and there was no way out, they repackaged it as postmodernism, right? And then they basically started to run with that now. But it's an interesting theory. There's a lot of discussion on this. But I think the key elements to highlight are, one, it's a reaction to modernity. Two, it's a rejection of truth and objectivity when it comes to truth and morality and ethics and all of this type of stuff. Three, it's an age of anything goes pretty much, right?
And it's embracement of ambiguity, I think also contradiction and plurality. It rejects modernism and the other thing we mentioned, and it embraces all these other things.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a question for you guys. There's so many differences between modernity and postmodernism, modernism and postmodernism. They're almost clear opposites to each other.
Contradiction.
What's similar between the two?
Staying away from God.
Yeah, literally. You see the same theme, right? Amongst all of these ideas and ideologies, there's still a rejection of God, right? Of an ultimate truth or a reality. If anything, the way I see it, who follows cricket or plays cricket or watches cricket? Okay, for you guys it'll make sense. You know in cricket, when you're bowling, you bowl the ball, but a good bowler does what after he's let the ball go? No, after he's let the ball go of his hand, what happens after that? There's a follow-through.
He follows it.
Follow through, right? There's a follow-through. The way I see it is postmodernism fully follows through with the implications of modernity. So they turned away from God, right? Became secular, made man God and in control of reality. But at the same time, they wanted to hold on to principles and truth, right? And higher moral values and all of this stuff. What postmodernism is just following through. It's saying, well, where did you get obviously you didn't fulfill these principles and these promises, but where did you get these ideas from anyway? It's all subjective. What are we going to ground this stuff in, right? So they're fully following through in some respects, where anything goes. You can be anything you want, you can do anything you want, you can identify yourself in any way you want, but they still have, or they try to hold on to some principles, right? Of, equality, of liberty, of justice, all of this stuff. But how they ground it is another big question. And I would say they fall into the same traps as the modernists fall into, which is there's no way of objectively grounding these things, right? The same issues apply, right? So, any comments on this?
So, in terms of how they rejected God in modernism and postmodernism, was there like a difference? Because in postmodernism, like Bertrand Russell, he said, like for universe, he said it came from nothing. So they are just saying everything is kind of random and stuff.
On a pragmatic level, I would say there's an interesting discussion. I think Russell was a modernist, more so. Mm-hmm. He's of that age. But you would see amongst, if you talk to people generally on the ground, there seems to be a shift from this type of hardline atheism and naturalism now towards a new age type of spirituality, right?
Cultural Christian.
Yeah, so a lot of people experimenting these days. They have weird beliefs, like they believe in the universe, they believe in some sort of higher consciousness, or whatever the case is. They believe in other beings and entities that they encounter, for example, through engaging with psychedelics. So they are a lot more fluid with the way their beliefs are, right? Again, they believe truth is whatever they want it to be, right? So for one person, it may be a case of believing in this tree spirit. Another person, it may be believing in some sort of being. Another person, it may be worshipping the universe, etc. So there's some weird beliefs and ideas now out there, right? No, you won't find many of the postmodernist types to be sort of hardline naturalist atheists like Richard Dawkins, for example, or the new age, new atheists. Right? They're a bit different. They're a bit more fluid, right? Almost like the Sam Harris types now. Harris made a shift as well, towards this atheistic type of spirituality, spirituality without God. So yeah, you will see these different ideas basically. Anything else?
feel like what triggered it was the fact that in modernity, the promise wasn't fulfilled. So that kind of broke people's trust in it. So then they thought they don't have anything solid, so we're going to create our own ones.
Yeah, on top of it, I think also it's a way of giving yourself meaning. Because all of these social justice movements as well, it's almost these people believe this is the meaning of their life, right? But there's an inherent contradiction there because they are standing for causes which they truly believe in to be objectively, morally wrong or bad that they're standing against. But there's no way of grounding this, you know, on modernism or postmodernism or metamodernism now, which some people talk about, which is this third phase now, which is a combination of modernity and postmodernism. So, you know, it's like it's postmodernism with the optimism of modernity, right? So, because postmodernism was a very sort of optimistic type of movement. It's about dissecting everything, deconstructing everything, breaking everything down, all of this type of stuff. But so there's a mix now, mix and match. But anyway, does everyone have a sort of general picture in their mind in regards to these phases of recent history, right? And one thing that's in common is the secularization, turning away from God, turning away from religion, right?
Godlessness.
Exactly. And therefore, this means, and this is our next section, which is they all experience the same existential crises. So anyone that adheres to or adopts these worldviews, or any version of these worldviews that denies God and denies religion, would end up with these same crises, right? So the first one, there's a couple in no specific order: the crises of knowledge, the crisis of meaning, the crisis of identity, and the crisis of morality, right? By no means are these, you know, complete. There's probably more, but I think these are the four main ones that have emerged, right? Now, Tariq read the quote from Nietzsche last time, the madman in the Gay Science, right? And he sort of alluded to this unchaining of the earth from his sun and not knowing where you're going or what direction people are going on because you killed God. Sort of highlighting the crisis that was impending, that was coming. Now, let's look at the crisis of knowledge, right? What would you guys think it is?
Epistemology and stuff.
Yeah, this one's probably the most subtle one,
Okay.
right? Because, you know, on the surface you can argue, well, there's some clarity. At least for the modernists, there was some clarity. Empiricism, rationalism, right? Maybe not so much for the postmodernists, but there was some clarity there. So what was the crisis? What would you say the crisis was? What type of knowledge did they turn away from?
Religion.
Yeah. Religious
Spiritual.
knowledge, spiritual, yeah. Metaphysics to a great extent.
Would you class it? Did they run away from logic though, or abstract thought?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
I would say it was encouraged,
Okay.
right? So rationalism was encouraged. Reason. Now, rationalism can go against empiricism, depending on how you define rationalism and how you define empiricism. Some hardline rationalists would say, no, it's not about experience, it's about thought and you reasoning to the truth, as opposed to experiencing the truth, right? However, I think there was generally the way people adhere to these things was a mix of both. So rational inquiry, philosophy, and science, right? So, and they focused and fixated on these two, discarding all other forms of knowledge, right? Or predominantly all other forms of knowledge. We know religious knowledge is from an Islamic. Let's go step into the Islamic paradigm for a second, worldview. Okay, and we'll discuss this when we get to that section. But from an Islamic paradigm worldview, what forms of knowledge do we recognize or have recognized throughout Islamic history? Now, remember, obviously, we may have our own specific opinions on this, so just share it. It's in the class. But generally, within Islam, what would you say? What forms of knowledge are recognized?
Testimony.
Yeah, I mean, testimony is also acknowledged by, I would say, modernists too, because a lot of reading and literature was based on testimony. You know, a lot of work that they did, science that they did, was based on testimony. That's only the hardline guys that follow scientism. Dawkins probably falls into this camp that would say, no, it's only science, you know, no testimony. But testimony is probably recognized by people that of modernism as well. No issue with that.
Revelation.
Revelation, yes. So we believe in revelation as a form of knowledge, probably the greatest form of knowledge that's coming from the Creator Himself, right? How we establish this, we'll get to when we get to that discussion. Why we accept this knowledge, etc. That's for later. We won't skip it. We'll get to it. But just for now, so revelation is a form of knowledge. What else? What about rationality? Rationalism. Do you think it's a part of Islam? Okay.
Yeah. Quran always emphasized أَفَلَا
Okay,
تَعْقِلُونَ
but
أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ.
yes. But how is it managed, if you like, within Islam? Is it free for all?
No.
So is there a boundary?
It's according.
Yeah. I was going to say, looking at Allah encourages to look around you and what He's created.
No, so being rational is encouraged in the Quran, right? So to use your akal, your reason, is encouraged, no doubt. But are there any? Because remember, from a modernist perspective,
Within the boundaries.
yeah. What would you say some of the boundaries are?
If it contradicts the text.
Okay, good.
The revelation.
So now we're looking at an epistemological framework here within Islam. So there are some forms of knowledge which are higher epistemologically than others, right? So what would be a most foundational revelation? Yeah. Obviously, reason may have a role to play in one arriving at revelation, but once you arrive at the truth of revelation, then that becomes the predominant source. Okay. So yes, reason within that framework. Yeah. So if your reason goes against the text, the Quran and the Sunnah, then you suspend your reason there, right? This is a very powerful point to understand, because and this is, we'll appreciate this. I'll give you an example. Many Muslims today, young Muslims, that have doubts, right? What mistake are they making?
Questioning too much.
They're questioning too. I wouldn't say that's a problem.
Yeah.
Questioning is a good thing in Islam, but what's the mistake that's being made?
Their ultimate truth is based on the secular ideology.
Yes. So in other words,
Their worldview.
they're putting rationalism above revelation, epistemologically. Why are they doing this? Because worldview. Their worldview is confused, right? They are probably 1 foot in this boat, 1 foot in this boat, 1 foot in the Islamic worldview, 1 foot in the modern Western worldview. Yeah, and when you're 2 feet, unless you're, what's that guy that did a split between 2 trucks, man? There's that.
No.
Van Damme, yeah, unless you're Van Damme, you can do splits like that. You're gonna feel some pain, right, with your legs splitting apart between the two, yeah. So this is the problem, right? So a lot of times what these people do is, this doesn't make rational sense in the Quran, so I'm not gonna believe it. I don't believe it. Do you see the problem? The problem is in the way they are using rationality and the place they've given rationality over revelation.
The hierarchy is
The
wrong.
hierarchy is wrong, yeah. Because they're in 2 places at the same time, 2 worldviews at the same
They
time.
expect it to like they'll put one of them as like their standard, and everything must agree with that.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's like everything must go back to that.
So for them, what rationality is?
God.
Standard.
Yeah.
The standard.
Mhm.
It's the top of the hierarchy of knowledge, roots to knowledge. So this is probably, so when they come across something in the Quran that doesn't make sense to them, they reject it, right? So this is not a problem with the Quran. This is a problem with the worldview or the ranking within the epistemological framework, right? That's the issue. Can you see how powerful this is, understanding worldviews and how they affect someone, and how you may now, understanding this, help someone with an issue like that, right? Instead of arguing with them, it's maybe a case of correcting the understanding of their worldview and where reason and rationality sits within the grand framework itself, right?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Quran that in the first verses of the second Alif Lam Mim, in the second surah of Quran, Alif Lam Mim ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. This book is a guide to muttaqin, the pious people.
of taqwa.
متقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب, those who believe on unseen. So these, if we find rational arguments for everything, then we cannot have any reason for unseen things.
Yes.
And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the iman, a criteria for that, to believe on unseen.
Yes.
So if we're searching for rational arguments or reasons, it doesn't work.
So also that highlights the worldview. So
Yeah.
Allah is saying that these people have a certain way of looking at reality, that this is guidance for, the Quran is guidance for those who believe in the unseen, those who establish prayer, and those who
Yeah.
give from what they've been given. Very powerful ayah to highlight, right? So what you're saying is that these people, that the Quran will truly, is hudan lin nas, the Quran, guidance for mankind, but those that truly benefit from this guidance are people of a certain ilk that Allah is describing now in Al-Baqarah, right? That those who believe in the unseen. Now that is not going to come, it may come from rationality, belief in the unseen or a world beyond this one, right? Someone may be able to reason to that, but there is something else. So what other forms of knowledge, it goes back to, within Islam do we have? So you have revelation, we have reason within, in its right place. What else do we have?
We have teachings of the Prophet.
Yes, but that you can say is a part of revelation, right? Meaning we have Quran and Sunnah.
Yeah.
Right, the same. Spirituality is a form of knowledge.
I mean, for
That's
some
more of an
people.
experience.
Okay, yeah, but some people derive knowledge from it as well. Like,
Yeah, that's good. So empiricism we can say is within Islam as well, right?
First degree experiences.
Yeah, so experience is very important in Islam as well, right? Something we don't mention today, unfortunately, right? Iqbal mentions this. He calls the Quran anti-classical, right? Meaning that the spirit of the Quran, Allah points us towards His creation, because these are ayat of Allah. So Allah is getting us to be empirical in our approach to reality, because there are signs in that, more so than us just philosophizing and reasoning and doing all of this stuff. So he says it's anti-classical, and he mentioned this for other reasons as well, which we don't need to get into here. But empiricism is a part of Islam as well.
ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك
إن في خلق
وقنا عذاب
السماوات
النار.
والأرض واختلاف الليل
اختلاف الليل
والنهار.
والنهار.
So Allah is encouraging us to be empirical. So empiricism has a role to play as well, right? Experience has a role to play. Now that could be the experience of the physical world, what we refer to as science today, engaging in studying the physical world, or it could be a spiritual type of experience, right? There's that dimension too, right? Where you, and let's face it, engaging in Islam is an experience, right? When we engage in salah, right? And I think we'll get to this again, we'll discuss this in a lot more detail in the last section, but I think it's good to point this out here. What is the salah?
Dua, prayer,
It's prayer, but salah, it's not really supplication.
practice,
Supplication is a part of salah, but what is the salah itself?
practice,
Ibadah.
It's worship, yes, it's a
Worship.
practice, but what are we doing? What is it?
experience,
It's a communication.
communication.
It's a communication with Allah, right? So this is an experience, right? And experiences, you can't separate experiences from feeling. Every experience has an emotion attached to it. That's why, people that do drugs and psychedelics, they have an experience which feels a certain way. If they have a good trip, they want to do it again. If they have a bad trip, they don't want to do it again. So experiences can't be separated from emotion, feeling, right? So experiences in Islam should have an emotional component too, right? Which in the grand scheme of things will help us chase that experience again. Now, obviously we say as Muslims, you don't chase the feeling, right? When you pray, it's not about the feeling, it's about worshipping Allah. That's true. We're not worshipping the feeling, we're worshipping Allah. However, I think the times and age we live in, where it's all about experience and the way it makes you feel, if it makes you feel good, you want to do it again. It's all about gratification, and we're conditioned like that, let's face it. I think there's nothing wrong in wanting to feel those things and asking Allah to give you those experiences in the age that we live in today. Because when you feel that connection with Allah, that the thing that you can't put into words, and I'm sure we felt it at some time in our salah, it may not always happen, but we felt it, that true connection with Allah. And when you feel that, there's nothing greater than that, right? It's a special moment, and you feel so connected to Allah that if someone at that point came to you and says, look, I can give you a physical evidence for God, it would mean nothing to you, right? So it's nothing wrong. And remember, when you're worshipping Allah, when you engage in salah, it's an experience. It's gonna come with an emotion, right? Unfortunately, sometimes that emotion is negative for people because they don't understand what the salah is. They just rush it, and it's a hindrance for them, and they feel agitated and annoyed and angry. And I'm sure we've probably felt that at times too. Oh man, I have to pray, and then you're rushing it and you're just feeling annoyed. So that experience is attached to a negative emotion, right? And the more you engage in that, it becomes programmed within your psychology in your mind, right? So we should strive that our salah is a beautiful experience and it feels a certain way. And there's nothing, but yes, at the same time, keeping in your mind, you're not worshipping the experience, you're worshipping Allah. But there's nothing wrong with having a good experience. It's going to come with a feeling one way or the other anyway. So ask Allah to make it a good experience. But anyway, we've gone off on a tangent, but the point is that experience is key. So empiricism is a part of Islam as well, within a framework too. So say, you have an experience, for example, shaitan could do this, the jinn could do this, right? Shows you something, or makes you experience something. And this, again, case in point, we've heard of stories of so-called Muslims who have an experience of Jesus, right? And then they leave Islam. And I don't know, I honestly think most of these stories are made up anyway, right? But some of them may have some truth to them. They have an experience of Jesus and then they leave Islam and go to Christianity, right? What's going on here? What's the problem? What's the mistake that's being made here?
You put experience above everything else.
Exactly, right? See how Islam gives us a framework to contextualize these things. You're putting experience on top of revelation. Right? So now you've seen, and on top of it, with experience, with phenomenal experiences, if you look at the academic work on religious experiences, what's funny is the academics highlight that there's two parts to an experience. There's what's observed, and then there's your interpretation of it. Just because you've seen a man with a beard in an experience, say in a dream or a vision, right? How do you know it was the man you've been told it is? Right? Why are you going with that type of interpretation when it goes against your text? Because you put experience on top of everything. And someone's just interpreted it, and then you've taken the testimony and combined it with the position you've given experience, and then you're lost again. Right?
So fitness started in Christianity when Paul saw a person or something, a vision, and he attributed it to Jesus Christ.
What a profound point, bro.
Mm.
A mic drop moment right there, man. Paul had an experience, right? He had a vision. He interpreted it as, now again, it's a question mark. What was the vision? Was it really the vision he said it was? But he interpreted it as Jesus, and then that he gave him a certain message, right? And then that started Paul's journey, right, to doing what he did. But that his vision could be questioned, because you have to remember Paul's historical context as well. He was a bounty hunter basically before his vision, right? So there may be question mark as to what benefits, worldly benefits there were for him to have such a vision. But we don't need to get into that now. But it's a good example, right? So your visions have to be interpreted, right? But in some cases, with these so-called Muslims see a vision of Jesus and leave Islam, they're putting one, the experience on top of revelation, and two, someone's interpretation of that experience, right? So okay, good. So within Islam we have revelation right at the top, and revelation is Quran,
Rationalism.
Sunnah. We have rationalism, empiricism.
Experience.
Where they go, I mean, it could be discussed, right? One would argue, if you look at it from the perspective of Iqbal or someone else, they will say experience over rationalism. Maybe not by much, but by a little bit. But some would say rationalism over experience. But they're there somewhere, right? We have something else as well, which we've missed. Is another form of knowledge.
Testimony.
No, testimony was there already.
What was it?
Right? Trustworthy testimony is a part of a tradition anyway.
Yeah.
The whole Hadith sciences is based on trustworthy testimony.
Intuition.
What do you mean by intuition?
Fitra. Yeah.
Perfect, yeah. So if you want to say intuition for fitra, yes, yeah, fitra. Innate knowledge.
Inclination.
Yeah, innate knowledge. Whether it's an inclination or it's an innate knowledge that's placed within us, we have this concept within Islam. We're not like I think Locke said it, tabula rasa, right? He said you're born as a blank slate, and then you gain understanding through your experiences of the world and your engagement with the world, right? It made sense to him to push that notion within the framework of modernity. But prior to this, the world, most of the cultures and religions in the world believed that humans have innate knowledge. Some form of innate knowledge that's there already, that we're born with. We come pre-programmed, So it's almost like an SD card and there's information on it already. And we believe this in Islam. There's the fitra. And a part of the fitra contains knowledge of Allah, that He is our Rabb. Now, why am I saying this? Where do you guys think I'm getting this from? that the fitra contains the knowledge that Allah is our Rabb. Not only our creator, but the one that maintains us, sustains us, and the one that we should worship.
From Revelation.
Yeah, but where? The essence of this reality is within our fitra. Where am I getting this from?
It's وعلم آدم الأسماء كلها ثم عرضهم على الملائكة.
Where Allah brought us forth from Adam.
From Adam, and Adam was taught everything.
No, not that specific place. I'm referring to another ayah in the Quran, where Allah brought us forth from Adam and asked us, "Am I not your Rabb?"
أولست ربك؟
Yes, yeah.
قالوا بلى.
Yes, and we testified. Many of the scholars say that it was at this moment in our history that this reality that Allah is our Rabb was embedded within the human soul, the fitra, right? Now, where the fitra is within the soul, the whole metaphysics of that, I don't know. Allah knows best, right? We don't know much, but it's within the soul that reality was embedded, that Allah is our Rabb. So innate knowledge, and obviously there's other aspects to the fitra, basic understanding of right and wrong. Surah Shams in the Quran, Allah mentions that He inspired the soul with a basic understanding of good and bad, right? So we have fitra as well. So all of these things are there. And maybe the ayah in Al-Baqarah where Allah mentions those people that this is guidance for, those who believe in the unseen and establish prayer and give from, maybe the fitra, those people are people of fitra as well, that recognize that there is Allah, there is another life to come where ultimate justice will be done and we will be accounted for in all of these things, right? So the fitra could have a role to play in that as well, along with rationalism, being rational about it.
In the modern world, could we replace the word fitra, not as Muslims, but to get through to someone that's not a Muslim? Could we say that mind and body duality? Would you call the mind the fitra? Because sometimes, because you know how they say that a perfect triangle doesn't exist in the real world.
Yeah.
We've read about that. It just exists in the mind. Do you get it? So that kind of tells us that there's things that can exist in the mind that doesn't exist outside the mind, and just as God does exist in the mind and it doesn't obviously in the physicality.
You can contextualize it for them like that.
Yeah.
But I would always mention that so in Islam we have the concept of the fitra, which you could refer to in modern terms as, maybe a part of the mind or the spirit or the soul, or the nature of a human being. So you can use different words as long as you get the point across.
Rationalizing mind and body, because a lot of the people, like the secular people, they don't believe in that duality.
Yeah, there's only the body.
Maybe we can try to explain to them rationally that mind and body is a separate thing, and therefore that's how we prove the fitra.
Yeah, but I wouldn't speak in definite terms.
Okay.
So even with consciousness, I asked, I think Hamza this a while back. Consciousness, like he's done a lot of stuff on consciousness, and I think at one point I asked him, when you refer to the consciousness, are you referring to the ruh, the soul? He said, look, it's he didn't really comment on it too much because he understood the intricacies of it.
Right.
And like Islamically, we shouldn't be making definite claims, especially when we're not sure.
Exactly.
But the consciousness is, one could say, is like the soul's experience of reality. Because us right now, yes, we're processing sensory data through our eyes and the brain's interpreting, but what's experienced, this eye that's experiencing all of this, is something beyond the physical body, right? This self. Maybe that's the soul, Allah knows best, or maybe it's an aspect of the soul, Allah knows best, not the whole of it, right? So again, be very careful with the way we, and be clear with, look, I'm not talking in definite terms, but what's important is the concepts and ideas we're getting across, inshallah.
I think for a non-believer, fitra is to do with conscience also, or it can be explained as if somebody does something wrong and they feel guilty about it, that guilt is coming from somewhere, isn't it?
Like an inner conscience, something inside you. Yes, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. About the previous point, I read somewhere, I don't know the scholar or the book, I don't remember. He said that all what we learn and we see, or let's say what we understand, it's already in our inclination. And while we read it and we think that, I learned this, it means that we discover it.
Mm.
It's already programmed, and we discovered it.
Or they remember it.
Yeah.
I knew he was going to say Plato.
Yeah, it's Plato.
Because he had similar ideas as well. That is, so it was. I think they call it essentialism, and can't remember the terms, but there's a view. So there's an essence. Everything has an essence, which is ascribed to it, right? And he mathematical truths. I think Plato mentioned in his plays that these are already within you. But what has to happen is they have to be brought out of you. Yeah. And the way they're brought out of you is through the right types of questions, basically. Fitra is similar, right? It's there within every single human being, that knowledge, but it has to be brought out. This is why in the Dawah training course, remember we mentioned different keys that can awaken the Fitra within someone.
And the verse we read earlier, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. If you go deeper to the tafsir of this, it means the same. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught Adam alayhi salam everything, the names of everything. It means that he taught him everything. So when Adam alayhi salam is taught all the things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted, so we
recall it.
We are going back to Adam alayhi salam. So inherited it. So the fitra is the same.
Yes, subhanAllah. Very powerful point, mashallah.
In Plato's one, he talks about how the multiple different gods taught the things. Obviously, our one is different. Yeah, it's crazy.
So we can appreciate that from an Islamic perspective. We recognize so many different routes to knowledge. Obviously, they put in within a framework and revelation from Allah. What Allah says is right at the top. But the problem Muslims have is when they put one, rationality or empiricism above revelation. That's where problems start happening, or issues start happening. Now, obviously, throughout Islamic history, there's been periods where some have favored rationality more, some have favored empiricism more. But the point is that there's a broad appreciation for different routes of knowledge. When it comes to the secular, godless worldviews, they seem to, especially since modernity, seem to have favored empiricism and rationality, right? Now, obviously, you had the logical positivists in the 1920s, etc. You did some work on this. Do you want to summarize it for us, bro? Who were the logical positivists?
No, I haven't done it for individual logical positivists.
Just generally,
generally logical positivism, from what I've kind of looked into just a little bit, to be fair, just a few hours, is the belief that truth is obtained via empirical evidence or analytical evidence. Yeah, that's basically it.
So
that's
there's a statement here: scientific knowledge is the only kind of factual knowledge, and that all traditional metaphysical doctrines are to be rejected as meaningless. So essentially, that's what they're doing. They're saying, look, science is the ultimate route to knowledge. Yeah. It's at the top of the epistemological chain, basically. And this, obviously, other thinkers and scientists. Bertrand Russell, one of the most famous philosophers of science, he said, all definite knowledge, so I should contend, belongs to science. All dogma as to what surpasses definite knowledge belongs to theology. So some of them were very ardent with the distinction and how they sort of try to undermine religion and theology. So for the modern Western world, empiricism is number one, you can say. Rationalism is up there as well, right? But empiricism is right there. So you can see the crises of knowledge in this respect is that they are limited to they've limited themselves to what brings knowledge. It's only science, it's only rationality. And for most people today, I would think even on university campus, it's all about science. Science has become a new religion in and of itself for many people. And this was what the Four Horsemen, at least originally the Four Horsemen pushed, was this type of empirical, rational approach to knowledge, right? Sam Harris, like we said, moved away gently to some degree, but Richard, even now today, the recent discussion between Dawkins and Peterson was very funny, right? It was comical. You saw both of them. Dawkins was, like they say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? He's hell bent on his empiricism, his scientism, And there's this clip that was being shared about where he kept talking about, do you believe Jesus was born without a father? And what's his name? Peterson. He was just lost because he didn't want to engage on that level, on a factual on a scientific empirical level. He's more about symbolism and the meaning we could derive, because he's a psychologist, so he's bringing in the psychological elements. So it's interesting to see their two worldviews going at it, back and forth.
You as a Muslim would say yes, though, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. I made a tweet about this yesterday. I said, look, from an Muslim standpoint, yes, we believe in the miraculous conception of Jesus, and yes, we believe in miracles, and we believe in miracles because we believe in God. Miracles are not a problem within our worldview. Because if Allah is all-powerful and able to do all things, that's our worldview. Then is a miracle a problem? Can Allah allow for miracles to happen? Can Allah suspend His own laws that He's created temporarily? Absolutely. No issue. No problem. Miracles are a problem for these guys because one, they have a distorted understanding of what God may be, and secondly, miracles just don't make sense from a naturalistic perspective. So yeah, it was funny to see them go back and forth.
It means Islam is wider than all these other things because we have different reasons for all these, and we can approach everything in a wider lens than them, because they have no rational arguments, scientific arguments for non-seen, something unseen.
Yep.
So we have for that.
Absolutely. And the key thing is that, some of them will try to present Islam as, oh, you just believe in religion and revelation and have faith in it. That's not what Islam is. Like we discussed today, that Islam appreciates rationality, appreciates empiricism. Allah encourages us to do both, reason and to reflect, both, right? And then we have the fitra. We have good reasons to believe in revelation. Except there's so much there, right? So it's Islam has a worldview is comprehensive even in this regard when it comes to knowledge and the roots to knowledge, right? And we'll see in every regard as we go along, inshallah. So I think we'll wrap it up there, inshallah, because we wanted to get through a few of the other crises of the modern world. But the crisis of knowledge, although it's the most subtle one, is a profound one because it leads to some of these other crises too. Because the modern Western secular world doesn't accept revelation as a source of knowledge, divine knowledge, therefore it can't make sense of meaning, right? Ultimate meaning is lost.
Sometimes the hierarchy of that knowledge, when we actually analyze the questions that they ask, they make categorical errors as a result.
Yes.
Because they would say, okay, show me God. Like, prove to me that God exists. And they want an empirical proof. Whereas they don't understand that from our worldview, if someone were to show an empirical proof of God, we'll call them a kafir. Because we'll say, there's no such thing. You can't show. If someone came to you and said, I saw God, would any of you believe them? No, you would call them a non-Muslim immediately. So our worldview doesn't even allow us to prove it in that way, if you know what I mean. So the hierarchy, again, here is very important, and that's why some of the Muslim brothers and sisters, they ask the wrong questions.
Yeah.
And they make categorical errors.
It's because fundamentally they don't understand the Islamic worldview properly, number one. Exactly. That's why this whole course is around this whole thing, so these concepts become clear in our minds. And then when it comes to Islam, as a worldview, and we live it like that, we won't have these issues. And secondly, we don't understand these other worldviews properly. Like, why don't we, when someone comes to us and says, give me physical proof for God's existence, empirical proof, why do we see it as nonsensical?
Because our belief in the in God is not physical.
Yes.
Simple.
So we understand that Allah is beyond the physical world. And secondly, we understand that the empiricism is limited to the physical world. So you can't use science to observe that which is beyond sense perception. And we understand that because we understand the limits of science, and we understand who Allah is. Right?
But what would you say to someone who says that, okay, you say that there's a metaphysical being, but how do you actually prove that metaphysical being exists? Like,
so this is when we'll get to this section. Okay. I mean, so reason will come into it. Reason has a role to play, no doubt, right?
Yeah.
But it's how you reason, right? And reason could be used to come to some non-rational conclusions too. It depends
they strawman a lot as well.
Yeah.
I think there are 2 or 3 philosophers and scientists that I read about them, and the quotes that they said. There might be more, but I read of three of them. They said that if somebody believes that the world is only materialism, and they stick to materialistic things, and they don't believe on something other than that, they say, I will call that guy who believes the same an idiot. This is the term they use. And there's one in 18th century and two of them in 20th centuries, recent philosophers. So it's powerful that they say that if anybody believes that the world is only contains of materialistic things, so I will call them idiot.
Yeah, and these people appreciated, that reality is far greater than what meets the eye.
I just want to say something, just to add on to what you were saying, because it was Socrates who was saying what you just explained, and he called them like irrational people, because when he was put into jail, he said the materialists would say that my body brought me to jail, but that's not true. My ideology is what brought me into jail. So that's where he says they can't get to the absolute truth with their worldview, and that's why he called them idiots.
Yeah. So I guess to summarize, few conclusions we've come to today is the Islamic worldview is comprehensive as far as its knowledge, roots to knowledge are concerned. We appreciate different roots to knowledge. Obviously, revelation and scripture is right at the top. But from a modern Western perspective, they've pigeonholed themselves to focusing on just the science and just rationalism. And that has shaped their outlook of reality, right? That's why they struggle with metaphysical concepts, with idea of God, angels, miracles, all of this stuff. It doesn't make sense to them because of their worldview. And also, yes, we appreciate what has been brought forth in some regards from focusing on empiricism and on rationality. A lot of developments and good things. But a lot of bad stuff's come out of it as well. And the reason for example, a lot of the scientific discoveries have been used in a bad way is because the ethical dimension's gone. Right? There's no grounding for morality anymore, which we'll look at next week, inshallah. But is everyone clear with this, yeah? And hopefully we're really developing an appreciation for how much worldviews play a role in our understanding of reality and how we engage within Islam as well, as Muslims.
I think in Islamic worldview, so we have in the top revelation, and we keep that in the top always,
yes,
and we
always.
never reject it.
Yes.
But in Western worldview, sometimes they reject their own scientific reasons. For example, Big Crunch was a theory among the scientists. And later on, they rejected it, and some of them rejected. So the contradiction between their own top priority reason for this worldview they have. But Islam, that's always Quran, always revelation.
100%, yes. And yes, reason is used in coming to these conclusions. But once you come to the conclusion that the Quran is from Allah, then that's the ultimate authority. Allah knows best, we don't. So whatever Allah tells us to do, we do. Even if we don't understand the wisdom behind it. That's the logic there. That's it. That's why we hear and we obey, as the companions did. Right? So, inshallah, we'll stop there. May Allah bless you guys. Jazakallah khair. We'll carry on next week. Jazakallah khair.